Hello and welcome to today's episode of Let's Talk Loyalty and Loyalty TV. Today's guest joins us from United, which is now the largest airline in the world as measured by available seat miles. United are using the tagline, "Good leads the way." And this strategy is clearly working both for the airline and for its loyalty business. According to its latest quarterly earnings report, in June of 2023, United achieved its highest month ever for newly enrolled members of the MileagePlus program, with over 800,000 new members joining. Joining us today to share how they achieved some of these superb results is Luc Bondar, President of MileagePlus. I hope you enjoy our conversation. So, Luc Bondar, welcome to Let's Talk Loyalty and Loyalty TV.
Thanks, Paul. It's great to be here.
I tell you, it's been a long time coming, Luc. I first became aware of the extraordinary achievements, I think, of MileagePlus back in 2020, which I know was probably quite a traumatic time for you, but certainly one to look back on with incredible admiration. So we're here to talk about that, along with a lot of other exciting things that you're doing in United, specifically, of course, leading MileagePlus. So,
Thanks.
Yeah. As you know, we've got a global audience of loyalty marketing professionals who really love to hear, I suppose, first and foremost, what do you admire as a loyalty industry professional? What program would you showcase and put on a pedestal as one we can look to for inspiration?
I'll start by saying, Paula, thanks for having me on today. It's an honor to be on here, and I think what you're doing is terrific, and it's great to create this forum and platform for professionals in our space. So thanks for that. Personally, I am a huge advocate of Marriott Bonvoy. I think that is just, obviously, I have an affiliation with the travel space broadly, and have throughout my career. But Bonvoy, I think, is particularly interesting because it represents sort of a modern transformation of a much more traditional model. Obviously, when Marriott Rewards and Starwood came together, there was a lot of noise about what would the result be. You had this sort of program in Starwood that had this insane fan base, and it was, I thought of as being hugely innovative and interesting at the time when that sort of first came to be. And then you had this more mainstay traditional program with the old Marriott Rewards program. Bonvoy, I think, brings together the best of everything that each party brought to it. But perhaps what I think is most powerful about that program, put aside its design and I think, the way they've structured it and the way it operates on a day-to-day basis, I think it's become a central pillar for the Marriott brand. It's become glue that sort of connects the dots between all the brands in their portfolio. It's the glue that connects the customer experience across all of those different brands. And the organization has reshaped how they go to market around Bonvoy as the center of their customer experience. And that, I think, just creates tons of opportunity and upside in terms of ways that value can be both understood and then delivered in the business. And so, for all those reasons, I think the team at Bonvoy does a tremendous job. I think it's a great program, and I think they're leading the way in many respects. It would be remiss of me not to highlight as well, as someone who has worked in and around the loyalty space throughout my career, that I have a ton of respect and interest as well in what Amazon have done with Prime. That's another very different subscription based, and it's a program that they've just layered kind of different benefits and services on in order to create this amazing sort of differentiated experience from a guest to an Amazon customer to a Prime customer. And it makes it a no-brainer to be a member of that program, and that program in turn gives Amazon insane value in terms of the data that they're generating through that program and that business. So really interested in that as well. But Bonvoy is my number one outside of MileagePlus, of course.
Of course. Well, we're going to absolutely celebrate MileagePlus today. But first of all, Marriott Bonvoy, of course, something that we, of course, also have on a pedestal. We're hoping to have them on Loyalty TV, and Let's Talk Loyalty at some stage in the near future. So, of course, open invitation to make sure that we get to share their story as we're about to share yours. And I guess the piece I love about Amazon Prime as well, Luke, you're absolutely right. It's the one that I think they used the word, I think when they developed that proposition, you probably heard it yourself, where they wanted to build a proposition that was so powerful that it would be irresponsible not to join. So I just think when you start with that end in mind and that level of ambition, that's something that I think consumers find utterly compelling. And it's one I have absolutely seen changing my behavior. I mean, I'm starting to buy groceries on Amazon. There's water coming to me. Like every time I think of something I need, I just instantly buy it on Amazon. So totally drinking the Kool-Aid on that one.
I think if I could react to that comment, Paula, because I agree 100%. And I think a lot of the time we have a similar dialogue inside United and MileagePlus to really think about the experience that we can deliver and the value that we can create for our customers, for our program members, sort of framing the best way to experience United. And also I'd say the best way to experience some of our partners, is as a MileagePlus member. Yes. And so creating, to your point, sort of that, an irresponsible kind of rationale for joining the program, well, not irresponsible rationale, an irresponsible act if you're not, joining the program, because there is such clarity around the value and the experience as a member, which I think is a job for communications, but it's also a huge job for design to make sure that it flows right through the experience.
Yeah. I always like to pick up on the words people use, Luke. So thank you for that. And I think clarity is something that as loyalty professionals, we perhaps lose sight of as we continue to build and innovate. So I think it's an important principle to make sure that there is that level of attention to almost simplicity, because consumers at the end of the day are busy people, and for our program to become compelling to them, they've got to understand it. And I know that's a key part of what you're doing with MileagePlus. So let's get into how we got to today. First and foremost, I know you've got a background both on the agency side and on the technology side, Luke. So tell us a bit about your loyalty career to date.
So I've loyalty's been central to my career for, I think, almost 27 years now. While I was going through university, I was working in sporting goods retail in Australia, and I recall kind of the CMO of that business approaching me and asking me what I knew about relationship marketing at the time. This is pre-loyalty as sort of a standard naming convention. And I sort of, in the spirit of faking it till you make it, I said, well, give me 24 hours and I'll come back to you. And the next day we sat down and we talked about kind of how loyalty programs were evolving in retail. This is going back into sort of into the 80s and early 90s. And so it was a really interesting time, obviously, that these programs were just emerging. Fast forward, I ended up working with a company for many years called Carlson Marketing. Worked for them first in the UK for a couple of years, and then in Australia, and then in the US. And that business spanned a range of different industries that it provided sort of full-scale soup to nuts loyalty services for, from strategy through to every aspect of execution. And throughout that career path I had, which was working sort of on accounts and then account development and then strategy and corporate development, there were always these central threads of retail, travel, and banking and payments. And so all industries that have scale, all industries predicated on sort of understanding customers and how to deliver a different product and experience to different customers based on their value. And so loyalty was a very obvious fit for all three of those. And so I had the good fortune of getting to learn a lot about this space and this industry, and really how to think about loyalty as a commercial model, not just as a marketing platform or program. And that's always been, I think, a central thread to sort of my operating thesis. It's like, how does this program, this platform, this business create value? How does it create value for the customer? How does it create value for the brand? How does it create value for partners? And so that's always been sort of this central thread. So through marketing and services, a little bit of time in advertising for a few years, and then coming back into it when I got the call from United to say, are you interested in joining? It felt like it had been sort of everything leading up to the point of this opportunity to come in and lead one of the world's largest and I think best
Yeah.
loyalty programs and loyalty businesses that set us up to do all the things we've done over the last 6 years as well.
Incredible. Yeah. It's a wonderful context. And I think for any marketeer actually to end up brand side and to have the opportunity to put into place, the kind of things that I know from my side working sometimes externally, you really know and feel and instinctively have a sense of what you want to do with the loyalty program. And from what we've talked about before, I really do think that it sounds like you've brought in first and foremost a mindset about loyalty and that whole idea that absolutely, I think you alluded to with Marriott Bonvoy, is that loyalty can lead an organization and, as you said, create value on all sides. So a wonderful experience to get in and lead a program, which I know it's published, has over 100 million members. I believe one of the top 3 loyalty programs in the world. So again, for us, it's super exciting to be hearing about what you're doing, what you have done. So tell us, what did you do when you started, Luc? You come in, you've got this extraordinary opportunity. Like, where do you start with so much opportunity?
So I think, I mentioned before this sort of mindset about thinking about these programs as a business. And so really one of the first steps was to understand kind of performance and how had this business been tracking, where was it growing, where was it creating the most value, and where were there opportunities to really expand that. And one of the areas that emerged pretty quickly was this focus, this concentration on our premier population. And as sort of Pareto principle, top 20%, et cetera. And so there was a huge amount of emphasis on that group. To the detriment of how we thought about the broader program population. And you mentioned before, we have well over 100 million members in the program. And so we have this huge base, and yet the vast majority of energy and attention was going into the top group in terms of their flying frequency.
Of course.
And it wasn't necessarily paying the right level of attention to how to think about value and how value is created. So when we step back to look at sort of the breadth of the program, a couple of things emerged from that. One was that we had a huge opportunity to better engage the wider audience, the wider population inside our program. And there were some fundamental steps that we identified as being sort of mission critical to achieve that outcome. 2 was that we saw, and I'll talk to that in a minute. 2 was that we saw an opportunity to better align the value that we were providing to our customers with the value that we were getting, and the mechanisms that we had in place to help understand and assess that, and then design the program and the experience to deliver value to our customers was out of sync with reality. And so we had a premier program that wasn't structured to accurately reflect the value that we were receiving from customers. And so we weren't necessarily giving the right value back to the right customers in the right way. So they were sort of 2 key areas that we took a hard look at. And then I'd say that the third, and this was sort of mission critical for us, was to look at all of our partnerships. These programs are obviously critically important for the parent organization, in our case, United Airlines.
Of course.
And we think of United as our single biggest partner and the most important partner that we have. And obviously we wouldn't exist without United. And so we have to have a really strong relationship there. But we also have these other super important partnerships. Partnerships in travel, partnerships in payments, partnerships in retail, that create a deeper level of engagement with our members as they go about travel and as they go about their day-to-day activity. And so really understanding which of those partnerships were working well, which of those had an opportunity to improve, was also sort of the other area of critical focus. So what do we do to broaden the scale and appeal of the program? How do we better align value with the right members in the right way? And then what were we doing to ensure that our partnerships were all optimized, both for our partners, for our members, and ultimately for the program overall. So those were the three areas in all of those, and we can go in any of those directions. In all of those areas, we made some really pointed decisions and changes to the program that have had some pretty profound effects.
Wow, we love profound effects. So what are you most proud of, Luc? Tell us some of the, I suppose, decisions and changes that you did put into practice, because I think what I've learned, from talking with people like you, with, so much opportunity, part of the challenge is knowing what not to do, because the wish list of what you can do is so long and so varied and so exciting. So tell us, of all the breadth of possibilities, what did you put in place?
So some big changes that we made in the first couple of years, when I came in, maybe one of the largest and most profound in terms of the impact that it's had with member enrollment, member growth, kind of engagement right across our program population, is something that sounds relatively simple, but it's really interesting. Having made that change, I've had loyalty program practitioners around the world come up to me at events and conferences and when I'm sort of out in the world to ask the question, how did you get that done? Like, how did you convince your CFO? And that was to go from a program where we expired miles after 18 months of inactivity with our members to making our miles evergreen. And when we made that change, we came out with a very strong statement to say, your miles will now last forever. And, that was a huge shift, and it was born a little bit out of personal experience. I had an experience with a program that I'd been a member of for many, many years, and I'd moved countries, and I had fallen into that sort of inactivity status, and I had lost a huge balance with the program, and I'd sort of I'd had that very personal experience, so I knew what it was like firsthand. But then we spent time surveying and engaging right across our member base to sort of understand which aspects of the programs were most powerful, which were sort of most frustrating. And the number one pain point for our members at large was miles expiry. Wow. And so we sat down as a team, and obviously if I go back to my past life, pre-United, there was almost a sort of a market practice to build around breakage management and breakage optimization. And the notion that we were giving out value to members and planning that there would be members not using them and optimizing against that seemed counterintuitive to the spirit of what we're trying to achieve. That we're building a program where value is going to the member, and we want the member to redeem that value. We want to see them experiencing it. So we spent a lot of time with our finance organization, finance leadership. In fact, went all the way to our then president, now CEO, Scott Kirby, to have sort of a really robust discussion around what would happen to breakage. What were the expected effects of this, and how would it change our program? And the net was that it was a business case decision at the end of the day, and it was when we mapped it out and we forecast what we would see in terms of member engagement, member participation, the subsequent impact on lifetime value, the subsequent impact on enterprise value that's generated, it became a really easy choice. It was the right thing to do. And I think that's the spirit of what we try to do at United and at MileagePlus. That's just what's the right thing to do for our customers, because if we do the right thing for our customers, inevitably it's going to be the right thing for our business. And so we took the time to thoughtfully build that business case, convinced the CFO and ultimately now our CEO that this was the right thing to do. We made that call. We went out with a pretty bold statement around it. And what we've seen is that's played out in enrollment, engagement, participation, activity amongst the broad population. So for our general members, that's really helped give them the opportunity to engage and stay active and in the program, sort of on the long kind of look forward. We've done a lot around redemption, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that a little bit later. So to make every mile that's being earned more valuable for every member. So we'll tap into that in a bit. The second thing I want to talk to that I'm proud of is what we did for our Premier program. We were the first major US carrier to move away from a distance-based program for Premier status. And I'm sure there are many listeners today or viewers who have done a mileage run somewhere in their life. I've certainly flown from country A to country B to get a pizza and turn around and come home
Yeah.
in order to hit that level of status in a prior year. And for
Yeah.
two reasons, I think that's challenging. One, the distance used to be a good proxy for value when sort of in the early days of these programs, and
Sure.
as premier and elite status was introduced. But with the rise of low-cost carriers, with the rise of increasing segmentation in the cabin, it meant that customers could fly a long way and relatively cheap fares, get into those top levels of status and get sort of a lot of value back,
Yeah.
putting minimal value in. And that
Sure.
imbalance creates all kinds of other knock-on effects and challenges for the program.
Yeah.
So again, in the spirit of thinking about this as a P&L and as a business and optimizing kind of the balance of value that we have,
Yeah.
we made the decision to shift to a revenue-based elite qualification model or premier qualification model in the case of
Yeah.
MileagePlus.
Yeah.
And that's been a pretty fundamental shift. Now, we announced that in 2019, and
Okay.
then with the program taking effect in 20, and then obviously 20, 21, 22, very
Yeah.
different years.
Yeah.
And so this is the first year that we're back at those same published threshold levels for spend. Now,
Uh-huh.
we still require flying. So we still have a minimum of 4 flight segments to get into any level of status.
Okay.
But we have different levels of spend depending on the level of flying that a customer does. So, a minimum of 4 flights and a
Yeah.
higher volume of spend
Yeah.
versus sort of a lot more flights and a lower level of spend will get you to the same levels of status. And
Okay.
so what we've seen, though, is that helps us build a very commercially balanced relationship with United, with the airline as well. So because our interests are very aligned. So it's
Totally.
been, yeah, so that's probably the second area. And then the third that I'm really proud of, some of those early stage changes that we made. I mentioned before my favorite program. We have a tremendous strategic partnership with Marriott, and we work worldwide to really elevate the customer journey.
Yeah.
We have a joint relationship between our loyalty programs that creates tremendous sort of reciprocal opportunity and benefit for members in both programs to connect their accounts.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
and we also do a lot outside of that to find ways to elevate the customer experience for customers that fly United and stay Marriott. So excited
Okay.
for everything we've done with that partnership. And then, in the US, we have very important relationships in the credit card space.
Of
MileagePlus has
course.
credit card relationships around the world in over
Yeah.
20 different markets.
Wow.
But in the US, our card partnerships are front and center. They're mission critical for our business.
Yeah.
And we completely restructured the relationship that we have with JP Morgan Chase, which has led to a whole new series of card products. We have a family of cards, one for every type of traveler, depending on, whether from fee free all the way to a sort of more expensive annual fee that comes with club access and all associated different benefits.
Yeah.
Sort of the full spectrum of cards for all of our different customer segments. And a different way of thinking about how we bring those cards out into market and put them sort of to our customers in ways that drive their customers' interest and sort of acquisition results up significantly. And so for us, that's been just a
Yeah.
tremendous growth story and great success. So really
Yeah.
proud of everything we've done across all of those areas.
Amazing. I guess the one I want to pick up on was the first one that you mentioned actually there, Luke, this whole idea of eliminating expiry dates and, creating a business case is, first of all, a complex endeavor, given the amount of assumptions, obviously, that you would have had to put in that. And without a precedent and without anyone to look to, I think with anyone who's listening today, at least they can say, well, look, United's done it, if MileagePlus is still at it, they don't even need to see the business case necessarily front and center, but at least to know that the decision made sense for you. So I suppose, want to applaud the bravery of the senior leadership team to trust, the expectations that were set. Because as I said, they're all literally at that stage if you're creating something so innovative and clearly, so directly related to the pain points. Like, I think that's wonderful that you, I suppose, had that added perspective from the customer to say it's the thing that's upsetting people. And if you've lost a huge balance yourself, I mean, I've never had that experience, but that's the kind of thing that creates disloyalty. And of course, people go out and they talk on social media. So what you did was incredible. And of course, something you couldn't take back. You can't announce something like that and then change your mind. So it's a big
We were
one.
really, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. We were very intentional with the
Yeah.
language that we used when we
Okay.
announced it.
Yeah.
Forever was
Okay.
an important word
Nice.
in the press release and all the media that we publish around this, the messaging to customers,
Yeah.
to make it very clear that this wasn't a, well, let's just try this and see what happens approach,
Yeah.
but rather this was a commitment to customers
Lovely.
that we were making. And I think that last point is really key, and this is central to the business case. Then it
Yeah.
holds now, and it
Okay.
informs everything that we do as we look forward. And that is to have clarity around the value of customer relationships,
Yeah.
to really understand, what that looks like, not just through the lens of sort of, well, what's the incrementality that we're going to generate through this
Mm.
program and the lift we're going to see, but to understand what does it mean for us to have a relationship where the customer, you know, has a brand relationship with us, has
Mm-hmm.
a higher
Yeah.
net promoter score, has
Yeah.
a relationship where they're willing to share more and new data with us as it emerges, whether that's contact information or they're sharing
Yeah.
transaction data with us. In the world we're living in today, especially,
Yeah.
the value of first-party data assets, brands building direct
Yeah.
relationships with customers, where the customer is willingly and
Yeah.
opted in and with clarity around how that data is going to be used, sharing that information.
Yeah.
That creates all kinds of new growth opportunities for businesses today. And so I'd say for anyone thinking about how they
Yeah.
frame that business case and that value story, don't just focus on kind of the immediate and direct effect of sort of the incrementality case,
Okay.
but also think about sort of the lifetime value impact, and
Yeah.
view lifetime value not just through the transactional lens, but also through
Yeah.
that broader sort of affiliated or adjacent sources of value that come with data and with permission and with consent and with a deeper relationship, because
Yeah.
there's value against all of those, and increasingly, there are opportunities to sort of explicitly demonstrate that.
100%, yeah. And again, there's so much in that, Luke, but there's so much I want to get through in all of the different topics in terms of what you've done. The one, as I said at the very outset, that impressed me the most was, I guess, at perhaps some of the darkest times for the whole airline industry. As we all know, 2020 brought existential crisis, dare I say, for all airlines. And I know United innovated in terms of, I suppose, looking to MileagePlus to identify ways to support the airline in a way that had never been done before. And it's our mutual friend, Everett DeBoer, who, explained to me, in simple language, I suppose, the financial instrument that United created. And there's just some numbers I saw published at the time, which I'll quote for anyone in the audience who hasn't heard. And I'll ask you to explain it, Luke, because you'll obviously explain it much better, having led that particular innovation. I think you described it offline as the best 16 weeks of work you've ever done in terms of the return on investment. But yes, I know MileagePlus was identified as a powerful, way of recurring revenue for the airline that previously had been perhaps underappreciated, certainly externally, perhaps not internally. But the power and value of the MileagePlus program to United as an airline was something that allowed you to raise capital at a time when nothing else, I guess, would have been affordable for you.
Yeah, no, look, absolutely, Paula, and I'm happy to talk about it. And of all the things that we've done over the last 6 years, I think we've delivered great value to customers, and
Yeah.
we've innovated in a whole lot of different areas of the program. But in terms of the impact of kind of any single thing,
Yeah.
this was transformational for us at a time when we were under just incredible duress. So if
Yeah.
I can rewind everyone to mid-February 2020,
Yeah.
so this is prior to borders closing, like we were monitoring, right from January, kind of everything going on. We were looking at what was happening in China. We were looking at emergency in Italy.
Yeah.
And sort of as these cases were taking shape, and, COVID was emerging kind of as a new word in everyone's lexicon. I sat down with our CEO to have a discussion around our current cash position as an
Yeah.
airline. And without going into all the detail,
Of course.
we were burning by the time we hit March, we were burning a huge number daily in terms of
Yeah.
cash burn, measured in sort of many tens of millions
Yeah.
every day. And we were also in a position where demand was falling off a cliff,
Yeah.
and we were still flying and serving all
Yeah.
these markets. We had to fuel them, we had to staff them, we
Yeah.
had to pay our
Yeah.
airports, etc. So we had all this cash going out, we had no cash coming in, and customers were seeking refunds,
Yeah.
and we were sitting on X cash. We had, a call from customers for refunds that was
Yeah.
roughly the same.
Wow.
And so we were not unique as an airline in this
Of
case.
course.
We were all facing a liquidity crunch that essentially, it had every major airline around the world asking the question, can I continue to operate?
Correct. Yeah.
Do we have to close the doors?
Yeah.
And that would be, I mean, as horrible and as awful and as traumatic as everything related to COVID was, airlines keep the world moving. And
Yeah.
so for airlines to cease operations is really, it's essentially it's not an option. And so you have to find a way through that. And so I sat down with Scott, and we talked about sort of what those options were. And, historically, the approach for airlines to use the loyalty business to rapidly raise funds is a sort of a pre-sale, a
Okay.
pre-purchase of
Yes.
miles, often with a
Yes.
credit card partner.
Yeah.
And there are plenty of examples previously
Yeah.
of airlines, essentially pre-selling $1 billion worth of miles
Yeah.
to their credit card partners or their other partners, and bringing the cash in now, and then obviously, sort of foregoing that cash flow in the future as a
Yeah.
result. But and that generally comes with a new set of commercial terms, and it may not be as attractive for the business. And
Yeah.
but that had been the historic model,
Yeah.
and so that was available to us as an option.
Okay.
But it wasn't one that I was excited about because it was going to
Yeah.
trash my P&L for a long time.
Yeah.
And not only that, it was also it didn't feel like the right approach at the time. So I sat down with there's another guy I work with at United who now runs United Ventures, and he was leading IR and Corp Dev at the time. And we spent about a week every night just brainstorming like ideas and thoughts and what could we do, and trying and testing different concepts. And through all of this was this nagging kind of, I thought, this sort of consideration that we sit today on this incredibly stable and resilient cash flow in the business. And that's through the form of all of our partnerships. MileagePlus is essentially a diversified business. We have all of the cash flows that come through our airline partnerships and our travel partnerships. And they are more cyclical in nature. As economies move up and down, they move up and down. And then we have all of the cash flows associated with our financial partnerships, our credit card relationships, both here in the US and around the world, and our retail partnerships and our everyday spend partnerships, which look more like day-to-day consumer spending. So travel and consumer spending. And the consumer spending portion of our business, while it certainly moves as the economic cycle moves, it moves less than the travel cycle moves. And we were able to look back at history and analyze and assess what had happened in this diversified business in the face of major economic impacts that had hit travel and hit aviation and hit sort of consumer spending writ large. Global financial crisis, 9/11, sort of all these incidents that had huge impact. And we're able to understand what happened to this cash flow, what happened to this cash flow. And what that revealed was the resilience and stability of the consumer spending side of our business. So that was sort of, insight number one. Two was, could we then structure and package this in a
Yeah.
way that would allow us to collateralize the cash flows
Mm-hmm.
so that we could lend against them.
Yeah.
And to your point, that's essentially what we did. We spent 16 weeks. I'm actually in my home office as I come to you, and
Yeah.
I'm sitting in the same chair that I didn't leave for about 18 hours a day for 16 weeks straight. We worked with some bank partners who were tremendous, a whole lot of lawyers, and a
Yeah.
number of internal team members to put
Yeah.
together an offering that essentially packaged all of the operation of MileagePlus and the intellectual property of MileagePlus
Yeah.
as a bankruptcy remote separate business wholly owned by the airline,
Mm-hmm.
that even in the event of an airline, even
Yeah.
extreme pressure financially on the airline, would operate as a going concern and would be protected in the event of any bankruptcy,
Yeah.
such that the cash flows associated with that business would
Yes.
also be protected, and they would be available to fund any financing and any loans that we made. So short story is we packaged it up, we took it to market, it was sort of a
Yeah.
2-week roadshow, and we raised $7 billion off the back of
Wow.
it. And
Wow.
so that then became the find and replace deck that was used by many of our competitors in the market
Yeah.
to say,
Yeah.
we have the same business model, so let's replace brand, United with our brand and their numbers with our numbers, package
Yes.
it, take it to market, and because we'd sort of broken ground,
Yes.
the market was already now familiar with the model. They were able to raise, increasingly more value
Yeah.
against the same offering, because we'd already sort of sold and educated the market on the premise.
Yeah.
And so those bonds that
Yes.
underpin are still out there today. They're
Yeah.
performing well. That's become a really valuable source of sort of financing for us, a line of credit.
Yeah.
Um, and at the time, that was pre any government lending.
Yes.
It raised $7 billion cash at the time we needed it the most.
Correct. Yeah.
And it sort of got us over that hurdle. And then we were able to sort of get some
Yeah.
government financing, and we were
Yeah.
able to then package up some other aspects of the business, all of which saw us through the
Yes.
pandemic and bring us out the other side.
Yeah.
But I think what that did first and foremost is it highlighted to the world the premise that had been made for a long time, and that is that these
Yeah.
airline loyalty programs in particular, or travel loyalty programs, have tremendous intrinsic value, but
Yes.
how we expose them to the market in a way that the market can understand
Mm-hmm.
and can invest in,
Yes.
while the airline can still maintain control of the
Correct.
program as a principal asset.
Yeah.
I think this is why Everett, I think, is so interested in the approach.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
the first time that this had really been done at scale, and in a
Correct.
way that was tremendous for the investor,
Yeah.
tremendous for the parent or the owner of the program, and tremendous for
Mm-hmm.
the program. Like, everyone won in that model, and in all the other models where there's tried to be separation, and
Yeah.
there've been other challenges around that, and typically there's winners and losers, and in this
Yeah.
model there were no losers. We all, it was a rising tide that sort of everyone was able to benefit from.
Thank you, Luke, for sharing that story. Truly world class. I have the figures again, just looking back in terms of, I know there was a Harvard Business Review article written exactly about this innovation. And I think I said to you last time we met, this show is all about innovation. And, God forbid we ever need, such extreme measures in the future.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, as you've said, you've broken new ground, you've created a model, a new product. And just the figures I came across again, because it did, as you say, expose externally the value of loyalty programs that certainly people outside of the industry, I guess, hadn't appreciated. So I saw figures from July 2020 saying that MileagePlus as a business was worth $22 billion valued at, and United as an airline at the time, again, extreme circumstances, was valued at $10 billion. So I think when the loyalty programs started to be visibly more valuable than their parent companies, it definitely changed, I suppose, the level of respect that our industry and our discipline absolutely has. So super exciting to hear all of that, Luke. There are so many other things.
Can I make one point there, Paula? Because I think
Yeah.
that you're right on, and it was very it was valuable for our industry
Yes.
to get that credit and to that recognition. But I think there's always been this underlying thread in this space around, like, what's the true value of the loyalty business?
Yeah.
relative to the value of the parent, and you get metrics like that where you have this sort of perceived inversion.
Yeah.
And I think the truth is the loyalty business is what it is because of its relationship with the parent. It's a symbiotic relationship. And so
Correct.
this
Yeah.
idea that you can separate and spin out and create this completely independent value is challenging. So
Yes.
finding ways to create separation and segmentation while still having ownership and control in
Yeah.
a way that allows the market to understand and appreciate and invest in this value
Yeah.
while ensuring that the sort of symbiosis between program and parent is maintained is,
Yeah.
I think, is the art. And I think it's one of the aspects of the financial
Yeah.
instrument that we created that
Yeah.
that achieves those outcomes. And I think that's why it's so interesting, because it sort of delivers on the promise while
Yeah.
keeping all of the pieces intact.
Totally, totally. Well, listen, we're coming up on time, Luke. So I guess, open final question to you. What does the future hold for Mileage Plus? Where are you excited? What are you looking to do? What can you share?
So it's made this has gone quickly, for
I
sure.
know.
So I look, I think the future is incredibly bright for the loyalty
Yeah.
industry as a whole. And I think it's something I mentioned before that goes to the core of that is the value of the data assets that we all sit on top of. For Mileage Plus, we have a level of insight around our travelers that reaches sort of far beyond what sort of many businesses know about their
Yeah.
own customers. And we're
Sure.
able to take that and use that in really interesting ways that is that I think goes beyond just delivering a better experience to customers when they're traveling or delivering more value to them when they're interacting with our various program partners. We
Yeah.
are one of the world's largest programs, as you pointed out. We have
Yeah.
sort of ubiquity of earn. You can earn miles
Yeah.
in thousands across thousands of retailers. You can earn miles in real time across
Yeah.
sort of a myriad of applications. And in terms of redemption, the same. Anywhere you can sort of use miles, anywhere you can pay with cash at United, you can now use miles. We have
Yeah.
real-time redemption in retail, in dining, in sort of travel, and a broad array of areas. And that's where historically a lot of the loyalty attention and innovation has gone.
Yeah.
We're now shifting to say we sit on this amazing first party data asset. What more can we do with that? How can we use that to be better marketers, to drive more value to each of our program partners,
Yeah.
to drive efficiency and effectiveness across everything we do in the marketing space. So I think that's where, in the program itself, you'll see kind of more ubiquity of earn, more utility of our currencies. You'll see kind of more involvement across different aspects of the travel journey, not just sort of in the planning and the day of travel, but also right across the journey itself through different partnerships. But where I think as a business this gets really interesting is
Yeah.
the opportunity to build on these data assets and to
Yeah.
use these to create new sources of value. So more to come there. Excited for everything that's ahead of us on that front.
Well, all I can say is I hope we can stay in touch, Luke, because there are some extraordinary things I know that are going on there, and I want to stay up to date and keep our audience up to date on everything you're doing with Mileage Plus. It's a credit to you, super innovative and exciting, and I want to thank you for your time today. Is there anything else you wanted to mention from your side before we wrap up?
I just say, I'm firstly, thank you for having me on the show today. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I am a big fan of the notion of paying it forward. I've learned a lot throughout my career from some amazing people along the way.
Yeah.
And so it's a real honor to get an opportunity to come on here and sort of share some of my stories and what we've lived through and where we're going, because I
Yeah.
think there are certainly lessons there that are really helpful for everyone across the board.
Yeah.
And maybe it would be remiss of me not to say, and just as a plug, I'm super proud of everything that we're doing at United. We're the largest carrier across the Atlantic. We're the largest carrier now across the Pacific.
Yeah.
We're the biggest airline flying US to Australia, which makes me particularly proud.
Amazing.
And as we build sort of an amazing network, and as Star Alliance continues to grow, as we build out kind of the United network, and therefore kind of the Mileage Plus program grows. I'm both humbled and proud of everything that we're able to achieve and deliver for our customers, and also excited for everything that we're able to do as a business and the value that we're able to generate for all of our partners. Because I just think we're in that sort of rare area where we're big enough and we have the scale and we have all the foundational pieces that we can test and try new things.
Yeah.
And through doing that, I think we break ground for others along the way. So, we're going to continue to push to do the right thing for our customers, do the right thing for our partners, and continue to build a great program that we're very proud of. So thanks again for having us on, and appreciate the opportunity.
Wonderful, super inspiring, I have to say. I can't wait to see what you guys continue to do. So Luc Bondar, President of MileagePlus, thank you so much from Let's Talk Loyalty and Loyalty TV.